able to hear me in my home office here.
While we're waiting for to get going, now's a good time to tell you how handsome I think you are, Stuart. Oh, we're live.
I've always known you felt
okay, brother. Yeah, thank you. Hey, brothers, this is Corey Rigler and Stuart Walters on Team Queastor, and we are walking through the first video of how to form a finance committee. So if you're a Team Queastor facilitator, this should hopefully walk you through the steps of how you have that conversation in your actual discussion groups. And let's just kind of get started off the bat. So, Stuart, what is your experience with finance committees?
Well, I think first and foremost, what I run into is that quite often chapters just don't have a finance committee. That we see it in some of the largest chapters that they might have a basic committee, but while most chapters feel the need to have other committees, especially like a Queastor or pledge committee, often they just don't see the same need to do so with the finance, and there's a perfect opportunity to do so, and it helps both the Queastor and the chapter.
Yeah, I got to admit, the first time I even heard of a finance committee was last year, my first year on Queastor faculty, and I actually thought it was kind of brilliant. When I was my very first discussion group, we were kind of going around and talking about, hey, what do you spend most of your days on as Queastor? I mean, probably every single person in my breakout group said that they probably spent 80% of their time trying to get money from the chapter. And, personally, I think that's kind of a horrible thing because, the Queastor should be a leadership position, not a money collector, right? And when I first heard about this idea, I was absolutely ecstatic about it. I was like, man, it just makes so much sense.
One of the ways I kind of just point out also is, the Queastor is the equivalent of the CFO of the organization. If you have any company or any other organization, the CFO is not undertaking all of the tasks themselves. They're delegating, and they've got other people who have responsibility for doing things like collecting money and also ensuring that how money is actually being used or dispersed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how the finance committee can be used here as well.
Yeah, the CFO thing is always a funny thing, right? Because I think as adults, that makes a lot of sense. If you're in the working world, you understand the role of the CFO. If you're a 19, 20, 21-year-old, what does that really mean? And I think that's something that I sometimes struggle with my discussion groups as well. But at the end of the day, I think what we have to do is basically let people know that, hey, if you want to learn both management and leadership skills, there's no better position than that of being a Queastor. And, I think probably one of the biggest proponents of the finance committee is Phil Patton on the Team Queastor as well. And, when I spoke with him about, okay, how do I have this conversation? He said, what you really need to make it, what you really need to make it about is how do we shift the burden of a Queastor from collecting money rather to a position where you can actually plan and create some sort of financial legacy. So I think that the finance committee is the way that we shift that from a dues collector to an actual leadership position.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely agree with it.
It's why you're on the call. I need a yes man.
Yes, Rick, you're absolutely right.
Right. Now, one of the things that
I actually agree.
Right. One of the things that my biggest question was really who should be on the finance committee, and as it stands now, I think that right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. I don't know if that's too big or not. If that might be hard to get that many people involved.
And I think it might be, but the key questions really come down to, when you're looking at who's on the committee, are who are the people who are going to be responsible for understanding the budget, understanding what is being spent. And as part of that, you really need to look and determine within the chapter, who are the people that spend the most money? And most of the time, what you see is it's coming from the social chair, the recruitment chair, and the Queastor. Those are the three biggest sources that actually spend money. And there are going to be some other things as well. If you have a house, if you have kitchen staff, there's some other management responsibilities there as well. But what I would say is that the number of people on the finance committee should really be based around starting with who spends the money and start there. The one thing that I'll point out on here also is that role of the assistant quaestor is one that we kind of laugh about it, because every year we have people who never even thought about having an assistant quaestor. But yet almost every chapter has multiple assistant magiesters, because the pledges get really excited about being a magister when they're coming through a pledgeship. So they want to be a magister, so they volunteer to be assistants. Whereas if you don't have that tradition and history of having an assistant quaestor, then people don't have the interest in understanding the role. And I think that's important to have at least one person there to start learning and understanding that role, and to also start building some legacy and continuation in that role as well.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm a little bit unclear. So for the assistant quaestor, is the appropriate abbreviation for them assistant Q or Ask Quaestor?
I think Ask Quaestor is a good one, just because even Ask Q, because you can inject a little bit of humor into it. Makes everyone feel a little more relaxed and easy. Always good to have an Ask You around.
Right. Ask. If I had a dollar for every time I heard about having an Ask You, you'd have no redoubt. Right. And I know where to spend it. So I am actually a Grand Praetor right now, and interestingly enough, I actually made a mandate for all my chapters to have a finance committee, and I actually did just that, where I said, who needs to be on your finance committee? The magister, the social chair, and the recruitment chair. And ideally, these people will all collectively go around and help the chapter, and help the quaestor to collect dues. But also, the thought was that this isn't just a dues collection committee, but rather, hey, let's intelligently create budgets together. And to your point, since they are the ones spending the money, hey, listen, social chair, do you really need $5,000 to make flyers for this social event that we're having? Probably not. That's probably $5,000 we could spend somewhere else. And I think that does create a degree of financial responsibility, where instead of just projecting numbers, we're putting onus on these officers to actually function like adults and managers, where they're giving us responsible numbers. And if we're not getting the revenue in to pay, well, guess what? Then we need to make some hard choices here. So either you help us get the money in, or else we can't have your program.
And something else that's interesting about this also is a lot of times, when you have these things going on, social events, recruitment events, people will want to spend more money than might have been allocated. And they'll go to the quaestor and say, well, we need more money. If you flip that around a little bit, a lot of quaestors are going to basically say, hey, here's the budget. You've got X amount of dollars to spend on the pledge program. You've got X amount of dollars to spend on social and recruitment. And basically, it gives the quaestor the ability to help those roles manage their budget, and basically say, hey, look, if you know how much you have to spend, you got to manage to spend within that budget.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what a great
it's almost like whoever made this deck then kind of planned what the agenda for the call was going to be. I don't know how it worked out like that.
It almost seems that way, but maybe not.
Yeah. I think, so again, as a facilitator, Stuart, with this information, what might you tell a brand new facilitator in terms of how directive are you going to be? Is there any kind of best practices, worst practices, any watch outs, things like that you might tell that facilitator?
It's a great question. I think that while there are occasionally things that come up that will surprise us year over year, and some nuances and difference, most of the time we see a lot of the common questions, and the things that really start becoming the biggest gotchas are usually revolve around things like trying to use Venmo or some other source of managing money outside of their standard chapter trackable financial. So I think that's the one thing that stands out the most first. The other thing is, when you start looking at a finance committee, I believe the most important thing to start with, and this is not even just about the finance committee, but even the Queastor role in general, is set expectations. Make sure everyone understands what the roles are and what the expectations of the roles are on the committee, and really how that is designed to be used, because that starts getting around some of the gotchas where someone might blame the Queastor for not getting enough money, or blame the Queastor for collecting on, trying to force brother to pay something. Instead, when we start looking at putting those roles and responsibilities out there in writing on the committee, it does help set some expectations up front. So you can say, look, this is not subjective. This is all based on what we define up front. And I think that helps avoid a lot of the gotchas.
That's a great watch out. That's definitely a great watch out. I wouldn't have thought of the Venmo. I'm still trying to figure that one out myself. I do think that, it's very important that this finance committee not operate in a bubble, right? And so for them all thinking about, how do they communicate that back to the chapter? How do they have transparency? I think is just as important, a role for the finance committee as collecting dues, right? So I think the more that, the chapter feels like they're aware of what's going on and invested in it, they have such an easier time. And I know we've got another module coming out in terms of, how to promote transparency, when deal with finances. And I don't know, did you see the new Avengers movie?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
Okay, well, that one's going to be better than the Avengers movie. I'm just going to throw that out there. So that's just set up.
Well, I have no expectations right now, so we'll set the bar. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Anyway. Well, it's going to be better than the 1984 Howard the Duck. Maybe a little bit worse than the Avengers, somewhere in that spectrum. So
okay,
but I'm glad
that narrows it down. None whatsoever, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
I hope you're a comic book nerd. Otherwise, those reference points are worthless. Okay. So I think, in terms of, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to come back to something you were talking about with this. Is that when you talk about the transparency, I think that while we do have a separate module completely on this, I believe having that finance committee actually gives you a start on the transparency. And I bring this up because I've seen highly competent Queastors whose ethics were called into question just because people did not know what they were doing with that money. And it's just because of a lack of transparency. And, and these are guys who, had their feelings hurt, who felt bad because someone questioned them about something, but it was all because there was no transparency and there weren't other people involved. Not to mention, this committee is really the first line in holding your finances accountable, holding the Queastor accountable to the chapter, and vice versa.
Man, I totally agree. I'm glad you said that. When, in fact, at my undergraduate chapter, we had a Queastor who was just kind of lazy in his record keeping, and it actually got to the point where they considered expelling him because they suspected him of possibly embezzling. Like there was no records whatsoever. And so, the record keeping is one thing, the transparency is another. And
I've also seen
like 50 guys,
Right, and I've also seen sloppy record keeping that actually most likely did cover up someone doing something wrong. So that is important to have between the record keeping and the committee. It's a visual way of saying I'm holding myself accountable, and the chapter is holding me accountable as a Queastor as well.
I love that. Yeah, I think the more accountability in an organization, the easier it is to just live by the ritual and just be good SIGs and do everything that's expected of us.
Absolutely.
So that's wonderful. Well, I think, is there anything that we're missing here in the meeting specifics? Anything you might do differently or recommend instead?
I think the one thing I would say is, like, when you talk about meeting specifics, I think at a minimum once a month. It's not necessary that you actually meet every week, but I would say twice a month, even if it's a 10-minute meeting where you have nothing really major to actually talk through. Even often those 10-minute meetings, when you start having them every other week or so, you start finding, oh wait, we're taking 15 minutes because there are a couple things we actually need to talk about. And so doing those kind of things are important. And it also takes any apparent subjectivity out of this. I mean, basically, it no longer becomes one person deciding to do something against another brother. It also can really reinforce, no, this committee is enforcing the guidelines that we as a chapter have set. So that's why I think it's important not to let it go too far apart, but at the same time, don't make it too frequent. You don't need it a couple times a week. You don't need it. Most chapters are not going to need it every week. But if you do, it's something fun. Do it over lunch or something.
Yeah. I mean, I was even thinking when you're kind of saying that, I mean, gosh, maybe it would make sense to have it either 10 minutes, I mean, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 minutes before every other exec meeting, since most of those stakeholders will be there anyway, right? That might not be a bad idea.
Not a bad idea at all.
Okay. Well,
that's actually what I meant to say is that's a great idea, Riggs. Wow. Spectacular thought.
Sweet. I'm glad you got my text where I just said, give me a compliment right now. I'm feeling a little surprised. I'm glad you paid attention to that. Well, I wish that I had known about finance committees when I was an undergrad. I think it would have helped out a lot. And last year, I just really briefly touched on the finance committee because I didn't really understand it in my discussion group. But I think this year I'm actually going to hit pretty hard on it. I just think there's so many advantages to it. And again, I'm primarily concerned with how do I give my Queastor more time? How do I give them more time to be a leader? How do I give them more time to do the things that a Queastor should be doing, as opposed to just collecting dues? I mean, that would just be a sucky job. So, okay, well, so I guess, if we could kind of put a bow and put a summary on this, I think that, having a finance committee is a good way to not suck at being Queastor, or at least to not hate your life as a Queastor. But that's my takeaway. Is there any big takeaways that you might sign off with?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. The lack of suckage in the job is a definite benefit. Well, it depends on that role. But anyway, that's another issue.
Yeah. Okay, well, so in that case, then it looks like we are done. Brothers, thank you very much for listening to this. We hope that it is helpful in leading your discussion group on finance committees.
Thanks, brothers.